What a wonderful thing is our church. This whole network is built on trust. The essence of evangelization is to tell everybody Jesus loves you. We're all called to be great saints. Don't miss the opportunity. Well, how are you? We have a great group with us this evening, and it's getting very cold here, and I know some of you are already suffering from inches of sun, but for we Southerners, it's very difficult. You know, the kids are all excited, and the school's closed, and nobody goes out, but we're not able to take all the snow they're predicting because we have none of those machines, you know, that just push it up on the side. And so it promises to be a very interesting and perhaps joy-filled weekend. You're not looking forward to it, are you? You know, we have in the piazza of the new church, the child Jesus holding his heart in his hand and wanting to give it to you. Well, we had an artist make it up for us, and there it is. And we have it at the end, and a little child shall lead them. And there he is. I think he's real cute. Really cute. I'm amazed. I'll tell you more about this at the end of the program, but I'm amazed at how many children are going to the temple, and they run up to the child Jesus. And we don't often think he was a child. He was born as a baby, he grew, and he was a child. And I think we need to have great devotion to the child Jesus. Some of you may have seen my guest before when he appeared on the journey home with Marcus Grodi, and that was sometime last year. But during that appearance, he mentioned g.k.chesterton. And several times an idea was born, so we have to do a series on g.k.chesterton. And so here he is back with us working on the series, very beautiful series. It's a combination of things that we haven't done before. But he's here to tell you about this forgotten author. And he's a great author, was a great man. So please welcome Dale Ahlquist. Why do you have such a, well, I can't say a devotion, maybe admiration, whatever, for G.K. Chesterton?
Well, reading Chesterton got me into the Catholic Church.
Awesome.
I was a Baptist, and I started reading Chesterton on my honeymoon 18 years ago. It gets better.
You did say honeymoon.
Yeah, on my honeymoon, yes. I was.
You didn't think that was odd?
No.
No.
It gets better. My wife is from Italy originally, and we went to Italy on our honeymoon. In fact, we were in Rome the day the Pope was shot. And I was reading Chesterton.
What was she reading?
She was reading Les Miserables.
Didn't I tell you something?
Well,
No?
let me tell you something.
Would have told me something, you know.
G.K. Chesterton said, a man is lucky to marry the woman he loves, but he's even luckier to love the woman he marries. And I'm very, very
Yes.
lucky and very blessed with my wife, Laura. And she followed me to Rome on our honeymoon, but she also followed me to Rome when I converted. And
how long was it?
I was received into the church in 1997.
Wow.
Yeah.
When did you start reading Chesterton? Though?
18 years ago, the day the Pope was
Took
shot.
18
Yeah.
years.
But it took.
Is your wife still reading Les Miserables?
It's a long book.
It's
Mother
a long.
Angelica, yeah. And I've been reading Chesterton for 18 years, and I still haven't read all of Chesterton. And there probably isn't a person alive who has read all of Chesterton. He was one of the most prolific writers of all time, really. Wrote millions.
What
and
was
millions
it
of
about his books that you finally decided to convert?
Well, I can tell you, first of all, reading him for the first time I had the same experience that Dorothy L. Sayers had when she read Chesterton, which was, she said it was like a strong wind coming into the building and blowing out all the windows.
Mm.
He's just such a refreshing and different writer, and he has a way of explaining the truth so clearly, and he's so consistently right. And when I realized how consistently right he was, I figured he might not be wrong about the Catholic faith. And he himself was a convert. And he defended the Catholic faith even before his conversion. Mm-hmm. And because he was such a complete thinker, and I guess that's the main thing about Chesterton, he was a complete thinker. He was able to consistently defend the faith and show how our Catholic faith informs everything in our life. You know, it affects your marriage, but it also affects economics, art, literature, everything. And he wrote about all those things. He wrote about everything. Mm-hmm. He said something about everything, and he said it better than anybody else. He was just an immensely quotable writer, and you know, each one of his great quotations kind of just grabs you, and you go, "Oh yes, that's
well,
right."
Well, what about Chesterton did you have some difficulty in?
Well, the main problem was I didn't have any difficulty with him. I kept reading him and kept agreeing with him, and
why did it take you so long then?
Well, you know, Chesterton explains it himself pretty well in his own book on conversion. He says the last step in joining the church, the very last step, is running away from the church. Even though logically and reasonably you know it's the truth, it's still an act of the will, Mother.
Yeah.
It's still, we have to make the decision. Even though we're logically convinced and we know that it's right, you still have to, it's an act of the will, because you know when you make that decision, it's going to change your life.
Right.
And he went through a long period himself before he finally made the decision to actually join the church.
Well, is it fear?
It is fear. Yes.
It is?
Yes.
Fear of what? Losing your friends?
It has to be an act of humility, because it's the fear of your own pride, admitting, you have to finally admit that you were wrong about the church when you join the church. And it's also the fear that you know you're going to have to change your life. It means total devotion at that point. Mm-hmm. And you also have that feeling of you can't go back then. You know that once you go in, there is no going back. And as long as you're on the outside, you're a little safer, you know. But
yeah.
Once you go in, of course, that's when the real freedom begins, and that's what Chesterton experienced and described, and that's what I experienced too. And he said that the church is much larger on the inside than it is on the outside.
Is your wife Catholic?
Yes, she is.
Was she always Catholic?
She had left the church, but she joined it. Yeah, she was a revert. Yeah.
Well, what is it about him that attracted you the most? He's written so much, but still there had to be something.
Well, I think it was that consistently right way he had of expressing himself. That everything he touched, he seemed to touch it with the truth. And he showed that the truth came from the inside with him. He was an intuitive thinker, and I realized the more I read Chesterton, I felt almost scandalized that I had never been taught about Chesterton. Why I didn't understand why he wasn't part of the college curriculum, why he wasn't required reading. So here's a thinker that's a match for any 20th century thinker, and I was thinking, this is someone that everyone needs to read. Everyone needs to read Chesterton. And
but you know, a lot of people know the name, but they've never read Chesterton.
Right, they've never read him. They quote him. He's very quotable, and I mean, newspaper columnists quote him all the time, because he said something about everything. But you're right, people haven't read him, and they should. They should. That's one of the reasons why it's so great to have the opportunity to do this series, because it's going to get Chesterton some exposure and I think inspire a few people to pick up his books.
Well, tell us something about him that was so wonderful.
Well, let's talk about how prophetic he was, for one thing. He died in 1936, so he was writing at the beginning of the 20th century. And he seemed to be seeing everything that we're seeing now.
Really?
Only he saw it then. He was predicting really the downfall of our society in terms of education, in terms of the breakup of the family. Chesterton said that abortion would be considered a sign of progress. He said that when everyone was worried about godless communism in the Soviet Union, he was saying the real heresy of tomorrow is not going to be in Moscow, but in Manhattan. There's going to be an attack on morality, especially sexual morality. And he said that as soon as the state starts taking over education, the parent is going to lose all influence over the child. And that students are going to be exposed to educational theories that are younger than they are.
That's good.
Yeah, and he said, education is really just truth in transmission. That's what education is. So how can we educate if we don't agree on what the truth is? And yet the modern education system is, well, we don't agree on what the truth is, but we're going to teach it anyway. and that's what he said about that. He also said so many profound things about the faith and about daily life. He said, the Bible tells us to love our neighbor and love our enemy, generally because they're the same person.
Not bad.
And he said, the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried.
Yeah.
And of course, one of his great quotations is, angels fly because they take themselves lightly.
That's pretty good, too. You ought to read Chesterton. What were his more important themes, though?
He talked about the importance of the family. He talked about the wisdom of the common man. Chesterton defended common sense above everything else. And the name of our series is going to be called The Apostle of Common Sense. And he's really a weapon to use against the modern intellectual. And I think sometimes a lot of Catholics are intimidated by the modern intellectual, and they're not quite sure how to handle some of the long-winded arguments against the church. And Chesterton handily dealt with those, and that's why it's a good thing to be well armed with Chesterton, because he takes on the modern intellectual very well. And he says that one of the things they do is they hide behind big words. They use big words as a substitute for thinking. And he says that.
Mind if I use that?
he says
I
that,
told my cousin one time, he how did I say that? Oh. Well, I had to think about it.
When
it was very good, though.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. When you think of it, just interrupt. But he said that all of life's great questions should be able to be asked in words of one syllable and answered in words of one syllable. And the modern intellectual has attacked common sense, and at every aspect, Chesterton is defending it. And when he wrote a wonderful book on St. Francis and a wonderful book on St. Thomas Aquinas. And in both of those books, he shows that what these two great saints did was they defended common sense. And
well, St. Teresa of Avila did. She said that she could always teach a girl how to pray, but she could never give her common sense. Yeah.
And
you want to hear what I did? I just thought of it. I was really upset with my cousin, and I said, "You know what's wrong with you?" He said, "What?" I said, "You're educated beyond your intelligence."
You're educated?
I thought that was pretty good. He never called me again.
Yeah. Very Chestertonian, Mother. Yeah.
I'm flattered.
One of the things people ask is, what's the best first book to read by Chesterton?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the overwhelming things about Chesterton is how many books he read. He wrote so incredibly much, and there's about 6 or 8 answers to that question, which is the best first book to read by Chesterton. But since the show is relatively short, I'll give the short answer. He wrote
an hour.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'll give the long answer. He wrote the Father Brown stories. These wonderful detective stories with a priest as the amateur sleuth, and they're very enjoyable reading, and they're certainly a good introduction to Chesterton. He wrote a book called What's Wrong with the World, which if you read it, you would think it was written today, but it was written in 1910. And that's a good introduction to Chesterton. And then there's a book that everyone has to read, and if you're afraid that you're going to go blind soon, that's the book you have to read first.
Why?
Because if you, in other words,
print?
No. If I wouldn't recommend it always as the first book to read, but if you're not going to be able to read anymore, read it first. Then read it right away. And that's the book Orthodoxy. And that's one of the most marvelous defenses of the Christian faith I think ever written. One of the best books ever written. And that's another one I recommend. But the other thing I recommend is the magazine that we put out, Gilbert Magazine, because that's a good introduction to Chesterton.
How much is it?
It's,
You ought to be a price in here, you know.
Yeah,
here it is.
It's $30.
$4.50 for this little thing?
Yeah, well, it's
Wow.
it's Chesterton.
Must be the contents, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's $30 a year, so.
Well, I think if you got anything about Chesterton, you ought to get it. Because he is one. You know, I hate to ask this question, but it's killing me. What book did you bring on your honeymoon?
It was called The Everlasting Man.
Were you trying to convince your wife or yourself? Yeah. I'm just teasing.
I know.
You know.
And by the way, The Everlasting Man is a book that C.S. Lewis read when he was an atheist, and he became a Christian as a result of reading that book.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No, I'm through teasing. Go on.
Okay.
But you know, there are a lot of fallacies. He said that fallacies do not cease to be fallacies, even though they become fashions. And you wonder the way people think today. It looks to me like they're in some kind of another world.
Oh,
it's not a reality, you know?
They have the strangest ideas, and as Chesterton said, even though they're crazy, they become popular, and just because they become popular doesn't mean that they're right.
Well, did he ever say what he thought would happen after he predicted these things of today?
Well, he said the thing about a prophet, you know, he never, of course, called himself a prophet, but he says the thing about a prophet is that if he's right only if the things he warns about come to be, and if you think about Jonah going to Nineveh, he told them to repent, and because they repented, they were saved.
He wasn't happy about that, though.
Yeah, he wasn't. But the thing about Chesterton is he said we have to turn back. We have to turn back to the Catholic faith. And it means turning around and going back. Mm-hmm. One of the fallacies of modern times is progress. We think progress is an ideal, but Chesterton said, progress towards what? You can't even use the word progress until you say what your goal is. And yet we say, well, that's very progressive, but they don't say towards what? They don't say what the end result that they're really trying to achieve is. And progress for progress's sake. And Chesterton says, we have to turn around and go back. We have to repent and go back to the Catholic faith. And people argued with him saying, well, that might have been okay to believe that in the 12th century, but this is the 20th century. And Chesterton responded by saying, well, that's like saying it was okay to believe that on Tuesday, but not on Wednesday. You know, truth is something that doesn't depend on the calendar. And he pointed out that truth is universal. It goes across time, it goes across cultures, and it goes across all other sections that mankind puts up. And he found that universal truth in the Catholic Church. And his prophecy was, if we don't embrace the faith, if we don't go back to the universal truth, yeah, our whole society is going to unravel. And he predicted that's what's going to happen. The whole society will just come apart.
Well, did he have a problem with the Eucharist, or did he accept it right off?
He accepted it very quickly. In fact, he wrote in a novel that he wrote before his conversion, there's a Catholic character in there who gives a wonderful defense of the Eucharist. And in his own writings, one of his most profound comments was, he said, it's one thing to believe in Jehovah being an ever-pervasive presence in the universe, but it's something else to say that Jesus Christ has just walked into the room.
Right.
And isn't that exactly what happens at the moment of consecration? Jesus Christ has just come into the room.
How about Our Lady?
Chesterton was very devoted to Our Lady. He wrote he wrote a whole volume of poems called the Seven Sorrows, and the Queen of Seven Sorrows is what it was called. And one of his wonderful early epic poems called The Ballad of the White Horse has a wonderful passage where the Virgin appears to King Alfred. And that's where she gives a warning about what's going to happen. And she says, I tell you not for your comfort, and not for your desire, save that the does anybody remember how that poem goes? Anybody remember yeah, it's a good poem. I hope, yeah. Didn't memorize that one before I came on here, but the sea rises higher. Higher, that's the rhyme with fire, or it's a good poem,
or
I'm
sire.
telling you. Yeah. Yeah. I tell you, not for your desire, save that the sky grows darker and the sea rises higher. You know, that things are going to get worse before they get better.
I want to know, though, did he say they're going to get better?
Yeah, well,
We already know it's worse.
You know,
so.
it's up to us if they get better, that they get better. It's up to us if we repent. You know, that's the whole point. And, revivals start by people choosing to do the right thing. And when they start doing the right thing, that's when things change. They're not going to happen by themselves. Things don't get better by themselves. Chesterton spoke about free will more than anything else. He says that's the most Catholic concept there is that it's up to us to do the right thing. And if we do the right thing, things will get better.
How do you think, if he were living today, what suggestions would he give on how to turn this thing around?
Well, one thing that he would emphasize, he says there's two great evils in our society. One is big government, and the other is big business. That they both kind of oppress the common man. And he would emphasize people working for themselves as much as possible, small businesses, and a wide distribution of property. If people could keep their lives more simple and less dependent on these mega corporations and on big government, by keeping their lives a little more simple and more independent, so there's less outside influence and pressure on their lives, the families will start to get stronger, and your faith will get stronger along with that. So that's one thing he would still emphasize. He was right about it then, and he would emphasize it now too.
But we experienced that in Italy. We've been in Italy, and you walk in one store and they have brooms, shovels, and they have all these things for the garden. But they don't have a rake. The man 2 miles away sells rakes. And it's hard to get used to that. And it's the principle that he's, everybody has a little shop, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Well.
But just because you can't get used to it doesn't mean you can't do it. Again, it's the act of the will.
I'm all for it. But in America, like right now, for the population and all. You can't be against big business, so do you think it's not good?
It's not good because it's one of the biggest factors in taking the woman out of the house.
The businesses?
Businesses. Why women go to work? Because they're a cheap source of labor, and that's what supports the big business. And then you got a big daycare industry that follows right on its heels.
True.
Chesterton said big business has done more to destroy the family than big government has. And it's because it's taken the woman out of the home and into the workplace.
At this point, how do you correct it?
Well, first by informing people. First by reading Chesterton, so everybody understands it. Everybody understands the problem. If they, that's the first thing is just knowing what the problem is. Just like it didn't occur to you right now, say, well, big business, that doesn't seem to be the problem. If you think about it long enough, it is a problem. It is a problem.
Oh, I'm aware of that because I'm all for farmers.
Yep.
Not that I am one, but I've always felt bad because farmers are paid not to grow anything, and then the big business seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Then their children don't farm, and then one day we're going to have a real problem if we don't have it now. So I can see all that, but when we see things that is so gigantic, you still have to have a solution. Does he give any solutions to the problems he sees?
Well, again, if enough people start understanding it and start living the life, they can accomplish it, and it'll grow from the middle. It grows from the middle out. It can't be forced on people from the top down. And we're starting to see small Catholic communities growing up, and they're being planted like seeds, and they will blossom and they will be fruitful.
And what do you mean by Catholic community?
I'm thinking of something like the Society of St. John up in Pennsylvania, and but just the emphasis again on small communities where people as much as possible own their own business and are independent, so they don't have outside pressure. They're not wage slaves. That's the problem. Wage slavery is a form of slavery, and because you're totally dependent on an employer, and they can sack you or get rid of you at their leisure. And that was one of his complaints against that huge capitalist system. And he insisted on small.
But he wasn't a communist. He was just the opposite.
No. He said
What was Chesterton?
Well, the word is distributist. It came from Pope Leo XIII.
Who?
Some pope, a pope.
Yeah, I know the Pope.
So, yeah.
But what was he? He was a what?
A distributist, which meant have as many people as possible owning their own property and owning their own means of income. That's what he believed in. So the emphasis was on small property, small business, and strong families.
I hate to say that. I don't want to crush your great idea. But doesn't communists do that?
No, absolutely not.
What do they do?
Communism is the state owns everything. This is individual ownership.
Okay.
You have to own your own property. Property is something sacred. That's what Pope Leo the 13th said. It's inviolable. And and the Pope said if as many people as possible own property, they'll work harder because they're working for themselves. And he says that's what's just. That's justice. And there'll be a greater distribution of justice, and that's why it was called distributism, because as many people as possible will own their own means of production. And it keeps families will stay together. When someone's a wage slave and drives across town and is gone 60 hours a week, they're not part of their family anymore. And it's really a revolutionary idea, but people just have to think about it for the first time. And it's one of the things we'll talk about on our series.
Oh, I'm glad, because I think he accepted what he really wanted was the people not to think of the world as it is, but as it should be, right?
Amen. That's right. That's right. And another thing about him is he talked about the wonder of the world, how great and glorious creation is. In fact, do you know who quoted Chesterton today in his weekly audience at the Vatican?
Yes. Our Holy Father.
Yes,
Yeah.
quoted Chesterton today about his wonder at nature and at the created world, and how we must always, always wonder at how beautiful God's creation is. Chesterton said, "Nature's not our mother, it's our sister. We both have the same father." And he said, "The world will never want for wonder, but will starve only for a want of